And it is now a little bit late. It's about 9:15 p.m. in Budapest, where I would have to say, for once, the sun made a very strange appearance um, this afternoon. Out of nowhere, we suddenly saw the sun. I haven't seen it really now for weeks, maybe even months. But it suddenly made an appearance, and it was quite an event. So, it was surprising. Now, having got that out of the way, maybe it was all in honor of Thanksgiving. So, to congratulations to everybody in the United States on Thanksgiving. Um, I hope this isn't disturbing anyone. I mean, it's still kind of on the East Coast. It's still early afternoon, well, mid afternoon, I guess. So thank you everybody on in the United States who has taken time off to join me. I really appreciate it. I see Robert, of course, he's celebrating Thanksgiving. He says, interesting, although I would be tempted to get the turkey out of the way now and do the lamb at Christmas time. I do like lamb. Not a huge fan of turkey, but I do like lamb. Um, as it is, I get to avoid turkey entirely, as my Serbian wife has not the least concept of Thanksgiving. Yes, I understand that they no concept of Thanksgiving, but by now it's kind of accepted really around the world that there exists this holiday in the United States that nobody else does, which is known as Thanksgiving. I remember there was a movie with Steve Martin. I can't remember the title of the movie. It was some years ago, and he was explaining that to some woman. He was explaining that the Italians celebrate Thanksgiving. He said, "No, no, Italians. There's no such concept in Italy as a Thanksgiving. No, that's nonsense. No, no, no. Italians do celebrate Thanksgiving." He said, "Well, how can they possibly celebrate Thanksgiving in Italy?" He said, "Well, because of all the mafia people who had lived in the United States. The United States um, deported them, and then when they deported them back to Italy, they celebrated Thanksgiving in Italy." And so, and of course, the United States did indeed deport a number of Italian mobsters. And I don't know whether they celebrated Thanksgiving, but I like the notion that people like Lucky Luciano, um, when they wound up back in Italy, then Rob says trains, planes. I don't think it was that one. I think it was an earlier movie than that. Yeah, he plays a much in Trains Planes. He plays a straight laced guy. He was playing a kind of a crazy guy in this film. So um, anyway, um, and so about to dive into the turkey in about half an hour. Sorry about that. I mean, what can one do? But okay. So only one day in the year, and since I do these live streams on Thursdays, invariably there is that one Thursday in every year when my American friends um, take leave and say, "Well, I've got more important things to be getting on with. I have a family, and so on." And I understand that. I'm not going to stand in the way. Um, so I want to get off on a on a lighthearted note today. So I want to look at Kaya Kallas. We like to have a good laugh about Kaya Kallas, and she gave a news conference the other day when she after one of these ridiculous foreign EU foreign ministers meetings. And this news conference was really quite startling. I mean, startling in revealing the staggering, willful ignorance of Kaya Kallas. I mean, it's quite terrifying. I mean, she is the EU's, so to speak, foreign minister, and this is the way she speaks. So let's take a look at what Kaya Kallas said. I think it was yesterday. Um, so she has a new hairdo now, and her hair is darker. I think maybe she's trying to look more serious. Anyway, here she is.
Really here is Russia. In last 100 years, Russia has attacked more than 19 countries, some as many as 3 or 4 times.
All right, let's listen to that again. Let's listen to that again because that's quite a statement she's just made.
Working on these details now, including the extension of our current missions in Ukraine. But security guarantees to Ukraine do not change the fact that the threat really here is Russia. In last 100 years, Russia has attacked more than 19 countries, some as many as 3 or 4 times. None of these countries has ever attacked Russia. So in any peace agreement, we have to put the focus on how to get concessions from Russian side, that they stop aggression for good and do not try to change borders by force.
All right, so there she is. She said that during the past 100 years, Russia has attacked more than 19 countries. It's a very strange way of putting it. Either it's 19 countries or it's whatever countries, but she said more than 19 countries Russia has attacked, some more than 3 or 4 times, countries that had never attacked Russia. So that's what she said. Countries that had never attacked Russia. So I mean, we're obviously familiar with the confounding of Russia and the Soviet Union, and so that's pretty much what you would have expected. That she and the Pol and Radek Sikorsky and Donald Tusk and all these people, they always talk about Russia and the Soviet Union as one and the same. But okay, so that's we're familiar with that, so that's not worth noting. It is worth noting as to which 19 countries is she talking about. Remember, she's talking about 100 years. She's not talking about, throughout its history, over 1,000 years, Russia has attacked more than 19 countries. She said 19 countries, more than 19 countries. So that left it vague as to what the actual number is. So more than 19 countries that Russia has attacked. Now one has to assume. So this is 100 years. So let's say this is 1925. But let's say, okay, let's go back to the Soviet Polish War of 1920, when incidentally Poland attacked the Soviet Union. I mean, Poland, was greedy for territory, and so Poland attacked the Soviet Union. But okay, that's she may say, okay, that was the Soviet Union. But then you've got the real problem, which was that in 1941, Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. Hitler was joined by a number of allies, including, of course, um, Hungary, Romania, um, Vichy France, Italy, um, and then of course Finland. Now, what happened after the war was obviously the Soviet Union, which didn't want to find itself in the same situation as it found itself in 1941, essentially said where our armies reached in May 1945, that's going to be our security buffer zone. We're not going to allow ourselves to be attacked as we were in June 1941. So you can see that is a punishment that countries received for taking part in the Hitler invasion. I mean, it's very hard to say. I mean, if you invade someone, you lose the war, you pay the price. Now, she obviously, among the 19 countries, she almost certainly includes Germany. Germany, which obviously launched the invasion, the 1941 invasion. Germany also invaded um, in 1914, which it was Germany that had declared war on Russia. You could say it was a six of one, half a dozen of the other, but nonetheless, um, the issue in 1914 was that Russia had began to mobilize, didn't declare war on anyone, but did begin to mobilize following the Austria-Hungary ultimatum to Serbia. So Russia hadn't said that he was going to join any war on behalf of Serbia. It just began to mobilize, and then Germany ordered Russia to stop mobilizing. Russia did not stop mobilizing, and then Germany declared war on Russia. Hard to make the case that Russia attacked Germany in 1914, and it's hard to make the case that Russia attacked Germany at any time during World War II. Now, Finland, obviously, Finland and the Baltic states had played a very dangerous game during the interwar years. I mean, presumably she's talking about what happened to Finland and the Baltic states. But they played a very dangerous game by being very anti, they were ferociously, vehemently anti-Soviet, and generally warm and friendly and supportive of Nazi Germany. Now, given the increasingly tense situation in the late 1930s, it was understandable that that Stalin would have been thinking about, how do I move my borders as far west as possible to win myself a buffer zone and win myself some time and space in the event of a German attack, because it was, obviously any Soviet leader would have known that at some point a German attack was coming. I mean, Hitler was pursuing, he was very belligerently hostile towards the Soviet Union. And while he did make a tactical shift in 1939 when he signed the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, that was just a tactical shift. I mean, any Soviet leader would know that, okay, well, this isn't going to go on forever. That basically Hitler signed this non-aggression pact as a way of keeping Britain out of the war, because he thought that, well, once Britain had no prospect of being able to help Poland in 1939 anyway, because the only way you can help Poland is if the Soviet Union steps into the war against Germany, because Britain had no means of fighting Germany, but with the possibility that France from the west and the Soviet Union from the east, that could stop Hitler from attacking Poland. That was obviously, Hitler was calculating, well, what are the British thinking? So the British can't possibly be thinking about fighting Germany. So their plan is to have the Soviet Union fight Germany for them. So once Hitler signed the non-aggression pact, then Hitler thought, well, now Britain really has no options. I mean, that's it. You have no means of helping Poland. And that's why he did it. It was a tactical move, and Stalin knew that it was a tactical move. Stalin obviously was more than happy to accept this tactical move because he needed time to prepare for the eventual confrontation. Um, so so this let Dustin live say, I'm worried about George. Is he drinking enough good scotch? That looks like a more soppy warm drink. That's that isn't tea, and it's not a warm drink. It's a cold drink, but it isn't scotch. So no, thinking school custard. No, 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 it's not school custard. No, no, no. It's not a warm drink. It's not tea, but it isn't scotch either. Um, uh, and but yeah, I do like my scotch, but this if I drink too much of that scotch, it's going to be hard to do these podcasts. Anyway, but it's very interesting. So Germany then launches this attack along with its various allies. Germany and its allies are defeated, and then the Soviet Union, in accordance with wartime agreements. This was, then went ahead and liberated much of Germany and much of Eastern Europe in accordance with the wartime agreements with Churchill and Roosevelt. This wasn't just Stalin decided to invade Romania and Bulgaria and Hungary and Yugoslavia. These were all part of the wartime agreements pursuant to the unconditional surrender terms that the Allied powers were pursuing against the Axis powers. That's what Soviet Union did. So that's so for Kaya Kallas to say, "Oh, Russia attacked 19 countries in the past 100 years," you think this is just Looney Tunes. Um, I mean, but it shows the kind of fever swamps that she inhabits, the people that she talks to. All of this, the Radek Sikorskys and everyone else. That's what they think. The only thing that obsesses them is Russia. Russia, this evil force, this horrible, evil, monstrous force, than which there's no power as monstrous as Russia. So that's why I think, well, that's okay. Germany, who cares about Germany? Because it doesn't matter. The worst thing is Russia. Doc Miller says Larry Johnson seems slightly loaded on Judge Knapp from Moscow last week. It's very interesting, though. I mean, I didn't watch that, obviously, but these people like Larry Johnson and Scott Ritter, they're in Russia an awful lot. I'll just leave it at that. But it's kind of extraordinary that it's not cheap going to Russia, and staying there, weeks. It's very odd. So anyway, but that's a Kaya Kallas. That's the foreign minister of the European Union. That Myra Page says, "Do want to go there?" As I say, I'll leave it at that. To me, it's very odd. When people go, seem to travel, and there's also kind of mystery as to who is exactly financing these trips. These are not. It's not Russia's not a cheap country. It's not cheap to travel to Russia. Certainly not cheap to stay in Moscow for any extended length of time. Yet they seem to manage to do it. So then so that's kind of more than 19 countries. She says this, and this barely elicits a murmur. I'm saying, what are you talking about? What 19 countries has Russia attacked? It says some more than 3 or 4 times. But listen. Anyway, she continues, and let's listen to a little bit more of what she says. Let's see. All right. So she's answering this question.
Initiative and the second question, is it usual practice when mediator during negotiation use the draft of prepared by one side of negotiation? Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, it has been also confirmed in the media that this is all the points that favor Russia. So, of course, if they favor Russia, then it's clear that it's also coming from that side. I think again, coming to the point where I started, in this war we have one aggressor and one victim. So in order to have peace and have lasting peace, we need to see obligations on the Russian side. There were in this draft that we saw, which is of course not the final one, we didn't see one single concession or obligation to the Russian side. I think in the long term, we need to see what are the things.
All right. So she said we didn't see a single concession. So she sounds like some CNN nitwit or Guardian nitwit. We saw enormous concessions from Russia. I mean, I don't know what she's talking about. So we saw the freezing of the conflict in Kherson and Zaporozhye on the line of contact, which would mean that Kherson city and Zaporozhye city, which are the capital cities of those oblasts, would remain under Ukrainian control. According to the 28-point plan, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, currently under Russian control, would be ceded to the IAEA. The IAEA would be running it. So the Russians would give up control of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, and then the IAEA would distribute the energy as a 50-50 between Russia and Ukraine. Then it said there, United States would offer security guarantees to Ukraine. That was in the draft. So when she says, "Oh, we didn't see any concessions," I mean, what the hell is she talking about? These are just enormous concessions that Russia was possibly going to make. We don't really know. It was a Trump draft. It was a draft by the Trump team. So we don't know whether Russia would have accepted this deal. But the idea of saying we didn't see a single concession from Russia in that draft, I mean, you got to be a complete nutcase to say something so ridiculous. And then let's just see a little bit more of this.
Hello, Jorge Libarreiro with Euronews. I want to pick up on what you said at the beginning, the importance to distinguish between aggressor and victim, because we've been hearing a lot about, capping the size of the Ukrainian army as part of a settlement, but we haven't heard anything about capping the size of the Russian army, which is the one that launched the invasion and caused the destruction. Do you think this is the right approach, and should Ukraine agree to limit its army while Russia is allowed to freely rearm?
No, notice the tenor of these questions. Whenever you're at these EU news conferences or at these NATO news conferences, all of the reporters are presenting the most slavishly obsequious softball question. Please hit this out of the ballpark for me, because we're all on the same page. And so, please, tell me what I want to hear.
For a new attack in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very good question. Exactly that. In order, if we want to prevent this war to continue, then actually we should, curb the army of Russia and also their military budget. Because if you're spending 38% of your total budget on military, and by the way, only 16% on social affairs in Russia. So if you're spending 36, or was it 38? I actually might mix the numbers, but close to 40%, let's say so, close to 40% you spend on the military, then you will want to use it again. And that is a threat to us all. And that's why the focus should be on these concessions that Russia will make. Of course, I mean,
So that's the concessions that Russia will have to make. So that's the idea, that Russia will have to make these concessions. It doesn't seem to occur to her, well, you make these concessions when you've been defeated in a war. You can't just simply demand. You need to make this concession after concession. Um, and I said, but that's it. Oh well, that's the concession. They have to limit their armed forces. They have to spend less on their military. This is. Oh, yeah, I see Marty has joined us, and we're all on the same page. There's the Kaya Kalas once again putting her hands to her face. What was it? She seems to like doing, it's her favorite pose, the hand to the face. Um, but it's just extraordinary. Oh, well, Russia has to make the concession. Earlier, she said that it's quite ridiculous to say that Ukraine is losing the war. No, no, no. Ukraine is not losing the war. Absolutely. We just have to keep sanctioning Russia. We got to keep pouring in more military support for Ukraine. Kaya Kallas is somebody, she wants this war. I mean, that's the issue here, that you've brought in to the NATO and the EU absolutely obsessive haters of Russia. I mean, these were the same people around during the 1930s, which, and in a way, that kind of sealed their fate with Stalin, because he sort of realized these are absolutely pathological in their hatred of us, and they will join whomever or whoever decides to attack us. Which obviously that was going to be Germany, and he knew perfectly well that the Baltic states, Poland, Finland, would eagerly join in any German attack on the Soviet Union. So Stalin, it was preordained that Stalin had to make his move as a kind of preemptive secure insurance of security for in anticipation of this attack. So I said, Marty's got another great picture here. So that is Orban, Milorad Dodik. Not sure who the others are, but it's obviously Orban and Milorad Dodik. I'm going to come to Orban in a minute, but it's not so much about Milorad Dodik, but Vucic, Alexander Vucic in Serbia, because Orban was visiting Serbia today, and Orban made a very strong commitment. And I'll explain what this commitment that he made to Serbia today. So that's Kaya Kallas. I said that's the person. She wants this war. She's desperate to ensure that this war continues. And unless Trump gets his hands around this and says, "I'm not going to deal with these Europeans anymore. I'm not going to have Kaya Kallas. I'm not going to have von der Leyen. I'm not going to have Mark Rutte. I'm going to just bring this thing to an end." Unless he does that, he's going to be sucked in. He's going to be sucked in and play this game that Kaya Kallas and the rest of them are playing. So then I want now to talk a little bit about, first about Putin, because Putin was at the Collective Security Treaty Organization meeting which in Kyrgyzstan, and he gave a news conference, quite a lengthy news conference, in which he said a few interesting things. And it's just worth just taking a look at some of the things that he said in that news conference. Um, so yeah, here's the there it is, and he's asked, as always, by Pavel Zarubin. Um, so it says the main global topic of the last few days has been Trump's peace plan. And of course, we have a lot of questions for you. To what extent does the initially published draft informally reflect our position? Have we received a revised version of the document after the US Ukraine negotiations? When, therefore, will Russian American negotiations begin, which, as we hear, have not been and are not being conducted regarding the document? When will Steve Witkoff come to you, and what are your current thoughts on the prospects for a peaceful settlement? All right, well, good questions. And so Putin responds, regarding the draft treaty, there were no draft treaties. There was a set of questions that were proposed for discussion and final formulation. In general, I've already spoken about this many times. Before my visit to the United States, before my visit to Alaska, we discussed this with American negotiators. And after that, a 28-point list of possible agreements emerged. And as I've already announced publicly, it was communicated to us through certain channels, and we have reviewed it. And then following this, negotiations took place in Geneva between the American and the Ukrainian delegations. And as I understand it, they decided among themselves that all 28 points should be divided into 4 separate components. And all of this was conveyed to us. Okay, so they were conveyed to them. Okay, in general, we agree that this could form the basis for future agreements, but this would be impolite for me to talk about any final options now, since there are none. So here is all I mean, he's being quite positive, even though it seems that we haven't heard about the what's in the 19 points that the Americans and the Ukrainians agreed upon. But he says, as I understand it, they decided among themselves that all 28 points should be divided into 4 separate components. We agree that this could form the basis for future agreements. So that's a little unclear. What is he talking about? The 19 points could be the basis, or the 28 points. Okay. Then it says some things are fundamental, and overall, we see that the American side is taking our position, which was discussed before Anchorage and after Alaska, into account. At some point, we absolutely need to sit down and seriously discuss specific issues. We need to put everything into diplomatic language, because it's one thing to say, generally speaking, that Russia isn't going to attack Europe. That sounds ridiculous to us, right? We never intended to. But if they want to hear from us, let's put it on record. No problem. Well, I mean, I think that's no problem. But if you agree upon a non-aggression treaty, and that's a good idea. I mean, non-aggression treaty, and then both sides have to make a commitment that neither intends to attack the other, for what it's worth. But if you want to go down the path, but that was part of the 28-point plan, which would be a non-aggression treaty between Europe and Russia. There are people there, I think, either a bit crazy or crooks of some sort, and they want to do something in return when they publicly tell their population, their citizens, that Russia is preparing to attack Europe, and that we need to immediately strengthen our defense capabilities. So those are that's Macron, Starmer, the Germans in particular, and of course, Kaya Kallas and von der Leyen. Either they're serving the interests of the defense industry and private companies, or they're trying to boost their domestic political approval ratings against this backdrop. Given the dire state of the economy and social sphere, it's hard to say what their motives are. But from our perspective, it's complete nonsense, an outright lie. Nevertheless, if this is being promoted in the public consciousness, if they frighten their citizens and they want to hear that we have no intentions and no plans, no aggressive intentions against Europe, then go ahead. We're ready to document it however you like. So that's the second time he said that. That oh, we can write this out. We can make it a formal matter. And but the thing is that you can only make it a formal matter if the Europeans and NATO do it. I mean, he Putin presented those documents in December 2021, and that would have been the basis of a non-aggression treaty. And so that's the only thing that makes any sense. It makes no sense for Russia to be asked to make a commitment that it's not going to attack anyone. Well, I think NATO needs to be asked also to make a commitment not to attack anyone. Um, and then he goes on. Perhaps this makes sense considering that we all want to talk and discuss things together and settle some points on issues of pan-European security. Perhaps so. We ourselves once proposed this. If our Western partners, we call them partners again, want this now, then go ahead, we're ready. But we both understand we need to sit down and discuss this seriously. Every word matters. Or, for example, one of the documents mentioned that we should resolve the issue of strategic stability together with our American partners. For God's sake, are we against it? We proposed this very thing. We even proposed negotiating with the Obama administration on certain issues. They said yes, yes, and then a month before the Obama administration left the White House, everything stalled. Now another treaty, the New START, expires in February. If they don't want to do anything, that's fine. But from these documents, we saw that there was a general desire to revisit these issues. Each of these issues is a separate, a very serious matter. We are certainly ready for this serious discussion. An American delegation is scheduled to arrive in Moscow next week. So that's Trump announced that yesterday, that Steve Witkoff and maybe Jared Kushner will be in Moscow next week. And then we have another question along this line. Continuing with a colleague's question, please tell us who will be the main negotiators on the Russian side. One more thing, there were reports of negotiations in Abu Dhabi. Is a parallel process taking place? Can you tell us who's talking to whom and what's going on? And then he said the negotiator on the Russian side is obvious, Minister of Foreign Affairs. And then again, Medinsky, he led the Russian delegation in Istanbul in 2022 and led the delegation in Istanbul of this year. So it's going to be Medinsky. And then regarding the current matters, in order to organize all this work, I've also included my aide, Yuri Ushakov. He's in contact with our American colleagues, but he can't do it all alone. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to some extent the presidential administration must do so. So the vast complex issues, and then talks a little bit about Abu Dhabi. Nothing much going on there. At the initiative of the Ukrainian side, such a regular meeting was scheduled and held in Abu Dhabi. On our side, a senior official from the FSB attended. A representative of the U.S. administration also attended. So this was at least as far as the media reporter, this was the U.S. administration was led by Dan Driscoll, the Army Secretary. This was somewhat unexpected for us, but we never shy away from contacts. I contacted the Russian representative and suggested that perhaps we shouldn't wait until next week to continue the contacts, but rather hold the meeting in Moscow this week. And then he talks here about so on. The latest information I received yesterday is that President Trump has decided that, as previously agreed, the American side is proposing a meeting in Moscow next week. We are always open to you. And then got again, this is another question. Will you insist that the territorial issue, particularly in Donbass, be resolved here and now and forever? Or would you agree to postpone it, so to speak, until better times? If I may, one more question. Would you agree to return to the G7, the G8, as envisaged in one of the peace plan options? Um, and then he happily goes on about the G7, G8. Well, that's what G7 or G8. We didn't ask to go there. We were invited there. We work there. It's a platform for coordinating certain positions. I should say, please note, I stopped going even before the tragic events in Ukraine. Didn't you notice? Yes, very much, is the reply. And then, so when the events in Ukraine started, they said, well, we're not expecting you there. Well, thank God. And I don't remember who, I think the prime minister went there once. I declined the first time because really, I'm not making this up. It happened to be right around the time the government was being formed, after I was elected president, I think in 2012. But we never turned down contacts. We're always open to interaction. Firstly, no one's invited us here. We haven't heard or received any official proposals. And secondly, we know the overwhelming majority of the members of this group, the so-called Big Seven. I already said once, I don't really understand why they call the Big Seven. In terms of territory, population, contribution to global GDP, they are getting smaller and smaller. Well, it doesn't matter. They are important partners. I can't quite imagine how we'll interact with them directly. Can you even imagine that? So we'll just show up, say hello, and then we'll just frown and look at each other, or what? That's, of course, absolutely right. And this was, of course, always meant insincerely, because they knew perfectly well that Russia wasn't going to rejoin the G7 for the obvious reason that Russia would be a permanent minority. It will be 7 against 1. And a number of the members of the G7 are rabidly hostile toward Russia. That they're never going to accept even having a Russian representation at any of these meetings. And apart from anything else, I mean, there's still the ICC arrest warrant that's still outstanding. So that's always going to be a problem at any G7 meeting. But can you imagine the British or the French or the Germans being willing to meet Putin? I mean, it's just so it was put in. It was a sop to throw. Oh, what about bringing Russia into the G8? It's never going to happen. Russia's not going to agree to it, and no one in the G7 except the United States would be willing to have Russia among them. And if you recall, on Tuesday, we had Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the UK Tory party, demanding a pledge from Keir Starmer in Parliament. She demanded that Keir Starmer pledge that under no circumstances would he accept Russia as a member of the G7. So that's then it goes on a little bit. I think there should be some kind of normalization. Perhaps if we implement all the proposals received as part of the list given to us by the U.S. administration, perhaps some conditions for bilateral or multilateral contacts will emerge, but it's too early to talk about that. And then he addresses the issue of the Donbass, which is what he was originally asked. You see, I tell you very briefly now, I think it will be immediately clear what I'm talking about. We're still receiving requests to cease hostilities here, there. Ukrainian troops will withdraw from the territories they occupy, and then the hostilities will cease. If they don't withdraw, we will achieve this by force of arms. So it's a little unclear whether he's just referring only to the Donbass or all 4 of the oblasts, because the question was about the Donbass. But if we go back to his peace proposal, Putin's peace proposal of July 2024, he said that Russia would cease hostilities if Ukraine withdrew completely from all four oblasts. That was his condition. Because it still seems that's what he's saying here, but it's a little unclear because the question was about the Donbass specifically, didn't talk about Kherson and Zaporozhye, but it says Ukrainian troops will withdraw from the territories they occupy, and then the hostilities will cease. If they don't withdraw, we will achieve this by force of arms. And then, but the enemy's biggest problem is the gap between their losses and the number of troops. And then he talks a little about numbers. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So he's basically saying, okay, in October, the Ukrainians suffered over 47,000 casualties. They gained around 16,500 through mobilization, actually through forced mobilization, somewhere around 14,500 or 15,000 returned from hospitals. But if you calculate everything precisely to the nearest tenth, the loss is 15,000, while the previous month it was 10,000, meaning the gap is constantly widening. But as we'll see, there are ways in which Ukraine can address this manpower shortage. And this was something that was brought up today by Zaharova during her news conference in the foreign ministry. Anyway, just to finish this off, and then we'll talk about Zaharova. So you know regarding the leaks. Oh, so this is a question now about, well, what do you think of these leaks of the conversations of Ushakov and Dmitriev and Witkov? And anyway, he goes on here. Mr. Witkov and I met before Anchorage, and then I visited Alaska, and certain negotiations took place. Overall, I want to emphasize, at least my overall opinion, that we understood where we stood and what was needed to be done to end these hostilities. Then we parted ways because both my colleague, President Trump, and I said we need to return to our capitals, think things over, consult with our staff. And then Lavrov and Rubio met in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly and generally discussed the matter. There was no conflict between Russia and the United States on these issues, meaning we remained on the Anchorage platform. And then suddenly the United States announced sanctions against two of our oil companies. Well, that caught us by surprise. Apparently, it seemed to have caught Putin also by surprise because it was an abrupt turnaround, even though Trump seems to be becoming more and more antagonistic towards Putin. I don't know what he was expecting after Anchorage, and so he was getting more and more angry at Putin. And then he suddenly announced this the sanctions against the Russian oil majors. So he says sanctioning two of our oil companies. What was the reason for that? Honestly, I didn't even understand what was going on. And so there's no point in accusing Mr. Witkov of being overly friendly with his Russian colleagues. We talked, we met, and then boom, with the new relations budding in perfect health, sanctions are introduced, which undoubtedly destroy our relations. And in fact, I repeat, we don't understand what kind of sign this is. That's the first thing. And then second, Mr. Witkov is apparently traveling to Moscow on President Trump's orders to negotiate with us. But it would probably be surprising if in conversations with Ushakov, he cursed us out, said something unkind, and then came back and tried to establish relations with us to improve his negotiating position. So, of course, he didn't say anything unkind. On the contrary, he said that he's a huge admirer of Putin's. And in fact, he said, I really think that Russians want peace. He said, but that's nonsense. Not to mention that Mr. Witkov is, by all appearances, an intelligent man. He should be able to create some conditions for interpersonal communications. That's understandable. And finally, the most important thing, I've known Mr. Witkoff for several months. His friendship with President Trump goes back many, many years, perhaps decades. He's an American citizen. He defends the position of the president and his country. Yes, we have a dialogue, and it's not easy. We conduct a dialogue without cursing or spitting each other like intelligent people, but each defends their own position. And Mr. Witkoff defends, I repeat, the position of the United States and the interests of the United States as he sees them, and as those who delegate him for negotiations with Russia see them. These people aren't just President Trump. I believe they also include people from the military, from the diplomatic ranks, and so on. So, if you recall, the thing about the conversation between Witkoff and with he was talking to Dmitriev. Yeah, Dmitriev. So there was two conversations. There was the conversation between Witkoff and Dmitriev, and then there was a conversation between what was it? Yeah, let me just think. No, it was Witkoff and Ushakov. Yeah, it was Witkoff and Ushakov, and then Ushakov and Dmitriev, because it was during the conversation between Witkoff and Ushakov that the issue came up. That, hey, look, this is the way you need to sell any ideas to Trump. You have to flatter him. You have to say how much you admire his peacemaking efforts. You believe he's genuinely interested in peace. And he was giving him advice on how to handle Trump. And Ushakov said, yeah, that's what, basically, yeah, I'm going to tell my man, my boss, how to do it. And, that's understandable. That's exactly how you conduct negotiations. I mean, that's, I think, what Putin is getting at during that rather discursive answer. But what do you expect? Of course, he's going to say, yeah, I mean, this is the way to handle Trump. So that's the gravamen of that news conference. He also said essentially, hey, we're doing well, and if we don't get a deal, well, we don't get a deal, and then we'll just continue with our military progress, and that's understandable. And of course, all the Russia champions, and say, yeah, Russia, that's it. Let's just go forward, crush the NATO fascists, and march to victory. We don't need no stinking negotiations. We don't need to work anything out with the Americans. And I understand that position. I think it's a stupid position, because I think that the longer any war goes on, the more dangerous it is, and the more it could spiral out of control and lead to a serious military confrontation between the United States and Russia, including, of course, a nuclear war. So if you're going to win, okay, that's great. Win the war, fine, it, over and done with. But if there's no real prospect of a win in the very near future, I mean, Russia will, if it goes on this grinding war, Russia will eventually win. I mean, Russia has the resources, the strength to grind out a victory. Maybe it's like a year, maybe it takes 2 years, but yeah, Russia versus Ukraine, even Ukraine with all that NATO is going to throw at it, Russia will win it. But during this time, it gets very, very dangerous. And you've seen how mercurial Trump is, and how he can easily just turn on a dime. He's going to sick to death of the Russians and say, hey, I need to do something dramatic and bring this war to an end. And so, speaking of that, there was kind of an interesting a moment during Zaharova's news conference. She's the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, and she let something slip. I mean, we were just listening to Putin, who was saying, well, look, the numbers don't favor Ukraine. they're losing more men than they're getting through mobilization. So, losing the casualties outnumber their new recruits, and ultimately, the numbers just don't. If it outnumber the casualties outnumber the new recruits by 15,000 every month, and sooner or later, you're basically just not going to have any troops to put in the field. Now, the problem with that argument is that, well, that assumes that Ukraine will not find any, or NATO will not find any manpower from somewhere else, and that seems to be a kind of a naive assumption. There is manpower. It's a big world out there, and there is manpower. There are a lot of poor people in the world who, if you offer them enough money, will go fight someone. And if you look at parts of the world that are heavily overpopulated, such as Africa, not really Europe. Europe is underpopulated, but Africa is overpopulated. Asia, much of Asia is overpopulated. You offer enough money to people, hey, and to go fight. I wouldn't assume that that's going to fail. And Zaharia kind of blurted out today that apparently this is what's going on in the Philippines. That there's a recruitment drive taking place in the Philippines. So let's take a look at what Zaharova said. So she says here, according to incoming reports, U.S. officials have launched a recruitment campaign in the Philippines to recruit local citizens to fight on the side of the Ukrainian armed forces. The recruitment process is conducted by RMS International, a Florida-based American company specializing in security services. Preference is given to former employees of the Philippine Security Agency and retired military personnel. Which makes sense. Preference is given to former employees who basically worked in the Philippine security agency and in the Philippine military. Applicants are promised a monthly salary of approximately $5,000. That's a lot of money. So if that's the offer of $5,000 a month, which is $60,000 a year, that is a lot of money in many parts of the world, even including the Philippines. But imagine how much that it comes to in Africa. Before being deployed to the conflict zone, the mercenaries undergo training under the supervision of American instructors at a training base on the outskirts of San Fernando. And Filipinos who signed the contract are issued a Schengen work visa at the consular section of the German embassy in Manila. It says, how about that? Beautiful, isn't it? People come to the embassies of the European Union countries for visas to visit these countries for peaceful purposes, to visit museums, theaters, to buy something, to travel somewhere, to relax, to visit friends and relatives. If they want medical or educational services, anything so-called humanitarian, they are rudely refused because they are Russian citizens. And now this position is being reinforced by decisions of the European Commission. How our compatriots, our citizens, are mocked and ridiculed with tales of some notorious Russian aggression, and how the European Union supposedly can't allow Russian citizens into the country because they pose some kind of a threat. And then it goes back to let me repeat, those who perhaps didn't immediately understand, the German embassy in Manila, the Philippines, issues Schengen visas to contractors planning to participate in the armed conflict on the side of the terrorist Kiev regime. Who do you think is listed as the employer of on these documents? This might come as a surprise to Italians, Spaniards, Frenchmen, and residents of other EU countries. After all, it's them who are being allowed into the territory, into this very same Schengen area. Who do you think is listed as the employer Berlin private security companies. So who's the employer? Berlin private security companies. Upon arrival in Germany, the recruits are transferred to other EU countries such as Poland and then to Ukraine. What guarantee is there that they won't be sent elsewhere? None. But the main point is something else. This is precisely the reasons for the PACE and all the other institutions. This is the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe that have sprung up in Western Europe. This is the European Court of Human Rights, and to discuss the situation. How is it that Americans are recruiting Filipinos in the Philippines, and the German consulate is issuing them Schengen visas under completely false pretext, providing false information in the relevant documents? Now, the reason why I thought it's worth looking at that, and obviously we don't know whether this is true. It certainly sounds plausible that I think this is where it's going to go. I mean, those numbers that Putin said, well, look, there's a shortfall of 15,000 a month with the Ukrainians. Okay, well, Ukraine will have to go find manpower somewhere else. Now, there are the immigrants in Europe, and you could offer them citizenship in Europe in return for serving in Ukraine. I mean, that might work. But you can go in a lot of other places. I mean, remember the Wagner Group, Russia's Wagner Group, Prigozhin's thing. They were recruiting in Africa. They went to recruit in Africa. Paid them nice sums of money, and no, why not? Why wouldn't they? Now, the only one drawback, and I can see that might be a problem, is that, of course, if you bring them in, you bring Filipinos in, or you bring in Africans to Ukraine, how are you going to get rid of them once the war is over? They're not going to want to go back. So, I mean, having fought, risk their lives for a chance to live in Europe, they're not just going to go back to Africa. So that's the fly in the ointment in this plan, is that you want to get rid of them. But remember, the Americans played this game many times before. I mean, the Americans did that when they were fighting the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. I mean, it wasn't really the Afghans who were fighting against the Soviet Union. They were going around the world recruiting Muslim nutcases to go fight in Afghanistan. They were jihadis. They said this is a holy war against the Soviet Union. That's why they were called the Mujahideen. These were fighting. They were jihadis, and that was the role of Osama bin Laden. When he went around, particularly in North Africa, but also, in the Arab world. Hey, this is a holy war. Let's go, go fight the Soviet Union. That was, Osama bin Laden was doing it under CIA auspices during the 1980s, when he was, much admired and loved by the United States. And then, of course, they did that. And again, that included Osama bin Laden during the 1990s in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because the Bosnian Muslims, they were not going to fight. They made it clear they were not going to do any fighting. They just, they wanted their state, that entity, Bosnia and Herzegovina, ruled by them, but they weren't going to fight, which is why, the Serbs were winning this war pretty easily. And then so how do you deal with this problem? Well, you bring in these jihadis. And that's what they did in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And that, of course, made the war much nastier. And, of course, bin Laden was in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He was in Sarajevo. He was offered Bosnian citizenship. So it's the same gang. It's the gang that was operating in the 1980s, recruiting people to fight the Soviet Union. They did the same thing. They were bringing in jihadis to fight the Serbs in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so there's a long tradition of finding people to fight. So that's why this naive idea, oh, well, look, the Ukrainians, they're losing this manpower. They can't go on fighting. Well, you can always find manpower. There's more than 8 billion people on this planet. You could always find somebody. And if you offer people enough money, and particularly young men, because young men, one has to say, are often very foolish and imagine that they're immortal, and that, that although they'll go in a very dangerous part of the world, where you could get your head shot off, they assume that that's not going to happen to them. And they think, well, this is a nice chunk of change. I mean, $5,000 a month, that's serious money. And I think, yeah, they'll do this, and then they're in Europe. They get their Schengen visa. They get a Schengen visa, and they're in Europe. And then try and get them out. They're there, and you're not going to be able to get them out. And you think the Americans care? Hey, we're bringing in a lot of Africans into Europe. Europe will be inundated with Africans. Well, that's a good. What do we care? I mean, they absolutely don't care. I mean, if you're going to fight in Ukraine, yeah, we're going to, have a bunch of Africans, and that's the price you pay. You want to go on fighting this war against Russia? Okay, fine, you go fight this war against Russia, but you're going to have to use African manpower or Asian manpower. You can bring in, Pakistanis and so on. And so, in many parts of the world, they have a surplus population. They have an awful lot of people around that you can make use of as mercenaries. So, that I think what Zaharova disclosed there was really quite interesting. Now, I did promise that I would say something about Serbia. Now, you remember I was talking a little while. I mean, there are the two kind of interesting uh, issues with Serbia. First of all, there is the sanctions that Trump has imposed. I mean, he hit the oil majors, Russia's oil majors, and then of course he's sanctioned Serbia's main oil company, NIS, because it's the majority owner is Gazprom Neft. So it's under part of, this is the sanction against Gazprom Neft. So that was under Biden, but Trump had given Serbia a pass for a while, but then that's it. The pass was gone. They weren't going to give Serbia a pass. Trump did it for Orban. He wasn't going to do anything for Serbia. And so now Serbia is in a little bit of a problem because this is its main oil company. It really can't do any more business at all. It's unable to import any oil. It's unable to refine any oil. It can't use dollars. It can't use. It can't accept credit card payments because all of that would be blocked. And so that's one interesting story about Serbia, and that's what the meeting today was about between Vucic and Orban. So, Orban visited Serbia and vowed that he will help out Serbia. Hungary will provide Serbia with refined oil products, but I don't know whether Hungary has enough to keep Serbia going. So there's a real problem. So here's this main oil company. The majority owner is Gazprom Neft. So it's Serbia that's suffering, but the sanction is directed at Gazprom Neft, and so he's in a bind. And so here's the story in what the situation that he's now, Alexander Vucic has found himself in. He says, which he says here, that okay, well, Russia hasn't sold their share of NIS to us, but we're going to give them 50 days to find a buyer. So Vucic says we will give Russians a 50-day deadline to find a new owner of NIS, And then it said, the Serbian president states at yesterday's session that the Serbian government unanimously adopted his proposal to give the Russian partners a 50-day deadline to find a new owner for NIS. If it doesn't happen, Serbia will install its management in NIS and offer the Russians the highest possible price for the company. He added that Serbia still hoped to get an operating license for NIS from the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control, but it's not going to happen. They're not going to give them any kind of a break. I mean, I think the problem arose from that for Vucic. Why Vucic doesn't seem to get anything from Trump is that I think that if you recall, there was that deal that when Vucic came to the White House in 2020, along with the Kosovo Albanians, and Trump exuberantly announced that, oh, well, as part of this deal of economic normalization between Serbia and Kosovo, that Serbia will recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and will move the Serbian embassy to Jerusalem. But Vucic really had no idea that that was part of the deal. And I think we talked about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago, that how when he heard Trump saying this, he kind of looked over at his aides a little bit puzzled. Hey, did we really agree to this? And I think Marty posted that little video of, he sort of looked at his aides and then he started flicking through the document. Where does it say that we're going to move our embassy to Jerusalem? But in fact, since 2020, Serbia has not recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He hasn't moved the Serbian embassy to Jerusalem. So I think having not done that, has kind of sealed his fate as far as Trump is concerned. Anyway, then, so that's the story goes on, and here we have. So Vucic said that at yesterday's session of the government, several Serbian ministers proposed that Serbia should immediately nationalize NIS, but his proposal was different, and finally the government adopted it unanimously. We are prepared to suffer all the consequences for the next 50 days. We are prepared to suffer if the refinery does not work for us, if nothing works for us, because we will manage and we will ensure a sufficient supply to the market. But after 50 days, if there is no creation of a sales contract, we have no choice. And even then, we will not nationalize, but we will introduce our administration, and then we will offer the highest possible price and pay the highest possible price to the Russian friends. Well, it's still nationalization. I mean, he can call it whatever he wants just because he's giving them a 50-day window and says, oh, we're giving them the highest possible price. I'm not even sure where Vucic will get the money from. But it's nationalization. I mean, yeah, it's nationalization with compensation. So it's not nationalization without, but you can't say it's not nationalization. Of course it's nationalization. If it's enforced sale, which is what he's saying here, it's an enforced sale, then that's nationalization. And says Vucic stressed that he conveyed this position in a letter sent to the Office of Foreign Assets Control, expressing hope that the Americans would extend the operating license to NIS. This is what Vucic always does. This he's always doing this moaning and weeping and oh, it's so terrible. I'm put in this horrible position. Oh, it's so awful. What's so horrible? He always looks like he's on the brink of tears. But the truth is that he knows that the Serbian population is very pro-Russian, and they don't like if Vucic does anything that upsets the Russians. And then he says, he added, the Serbia must give a certain period of time to our friends from the Emirates, Hungary, and other countries who are discussing NIS with the Russians. We are not owners of NIS. I say to Americans, people, what do you want us to do? We are not the owners. How are we going to sell it in February and we are not the owners, and the other party wants to say and prolong the sanctions. So he's weeping and saying, "Oh, please, please, please feel sorry for us." But the Americans are obviously not in any mood to placate Vucic. And here is the story from the Wall Street Journal. Now, what I thought was interesting in the way that the Wall Street Journal frames the issue, it says U.S. sanctions loosen Russia's grip on Serbia by forcing sale of oil company. The Abu Dhabi National Oil Company is in talks to buy NIS after its energy imports were halted by Trump administration enforcement. But notice what it says: U.S. sanctions loosen Russia's grip on Serbia by forcing sale of oil company. Now, who has the grip on Serbia? I mean, here we are, Serbia. It's doing business, peacefully getting its energy, getting oil, getting gas from Russia, particularly gas. And they said Russia has this grip on Serbia, and we're now loosening the grip. Well, who has the grip? The grip is the United States. The United States can actually put the boot into Serbia, force real economic hardship. I mean, you've got basically the premier oil company, premier oil refining company, is just going out of business. That's Russia, and Serbia no longer has any energy. Nothing, no energy. That's it. No oil, nothing. And there's Russia has the grip. Who has the grip? Not Russia. Russia is not doing this. Russia isn't blackmailing Serbia. It's the United States. And so, it's loosening the grip. Imagine writing rubbish like this, and somehow, when you're so in the grip of this ideology that somehow the Russians are the bad guys. So the Russians have a grip, even though no Serb has suffered as a result of the Russians, and the Serbs are now suffering because of U.S. sanctions. But apparently, it's the Russians who have this grip on Serbia, and and so this Rupert Murdoch rag continues. Serbia, so U.S. sanctions are forcing the sale of Russia's flagship oil company in Serbia, loosening Moscow's grip on a country. Now, the Moscow is very popular among the Serbs. I mean, other than, of course, the Serbs who are living off Western NGO handouts and who are basically agents of Brussels or Washington. They're the only ones. But the population, it kind of likes Moscow. The Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, based in the UAE, is in talks to buy Russia's stake in the energy behemoth NIS. The deal to purchase NIS, which is Serbia's only oil importer and domestic refiner, could still fall apart. The sale would come after U.S. enforced sanctions last month, targeting NIS as the Trump administration stepped up pressure on Moscow to end the war in Ukraine. Without the ability to use US dollars, the company has stopped importing oil and its refinery has all but ground to a halt. But it's Russia that has the grip. So without the ability to use US dollars, the company, this energy giant of Serbia, the company has stopped importing oil and its refinery has all but ground to a halt, and it's Russia that has this grip on Serbia. Facing a potential economic crisis, Serbia said Wednesday that Russia has agreed to sell its 56% stake in the company without naming potential buyers. And then, so that's Gazprom Neft with a 56% stake. The sale of NIS is the latest example of the reach of U.S. sanctions. Penalties imposed by the Treasury Department last month forced Lukoil, Russia's second biggest oil company, to scramble to shed its foreign holdings. A swift deal with commodities trade in Gunvor was rejected by Washington. I notice how the Washington can just simply reject a deal. It's a deal. To sell the majority holding, and Russia and the United States says, nah, we don't like this deal. and Russia is the one that has the grip on Serbia. And NIS employs tens of thousands of people, has an 80% market share in Serbia's market for refined oil products, which includes gasoline. The Russian state-owned Gazprom Neft bought a majority share in the oil company in 2008 when Moscow wanted to expand its gas and oil export to Southern Europe. For the Kremlin, NIS was an important piece in the regional energy infrastructure. It's very sinister. When Americans, buy up energy infrastructure, or anyone buys up, Germans or anyone buys up energy infrastructure, that's of course inhumane because, hey, they want to provide heating for homes. They want to make sure that industry is humming with energy. But apparently, when Russia does this, then there's some sinister motive. Who knows what the Russians are really up to. And then he says, since then, the company has been the backbone of Serbia's energy industry while quietly operating as a slush fund. A slush fund for Russia's influence operations. Well, of course, it's inconceivable that Russia would want to ensure the Serbs have warm homes in the winter, that their cars have gasoline in them, that their industry is actually able to function. No. It's Russia is running a slush fund for influence operations in the Balkans. Notice how dark it sounds. Influence operations in the Balkans. In recent years, it has financed Russian soft power projects inside Serbia and across the Balkans. I mean, what are these soft power projects? They have a Russian cultural center in Belgrade, the Russia House. They have Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff concert. That's Russian soft power. Also very sinister. Too much Tchaikovsky, and suddenly people are beginning to look to Putin. Hey, I gotta like Tchaikovsky. Maybe the Russians are pretty good people. Anyway, it is power project and inside Serbia and across the Balkans, including pro-Moscow media and non-governmental organizations, and in some cases, espionage operate. I mean, I love the way they bring up non-governmental organizations. The Balkans, including Serbia, are riddled with Western NGOs, absolutely chock-a-block full of NGOs. I mean, whatever NGOs Russia has, they are dwarfed by the number that Washington and Brussels finance. And then, this is a classic. It says Moscow and Belgrade have a long history of close ties. Russian support for Belgrade in 1914 was a trigger for World War I, and Moscow has offered unflinching support for Serbia during and after the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s. Well, that's, there's a lot that you can say about that. First off, to say Russian support for Belgrade in 1914 was a trigger for World War I is really a little bit much. I mean, the trigger for World War I was the ultimatum that was issued by Austria-Hungary, and that had the backing of Germany. Russia didn't enter the war. Russia began to mobilize. We were talking about this earlier. It began to mobilize in response to the ultimatum, because basically Austria-Hungary wasn't backing off. I mean, if you recall, Austria-Hungary issued this ultimatum. Serbia accepted almost everything in the ultimatum. I mean, it was a humiliating ultimatum, but Serbia more or less accepted everything, with the exception of allowing Austria-Hungary police to rampage through the country, conducting an investigation as to who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But they accepted almost everything. It's not unlike what happened in 1999 when NATO issued an ultimatum very similar to Austria-Hungary's ultimatum 85 years later. And Serbia accepted almost everything. The only thing they didn't accept was that NATO can have free reign and go everywhere it wants and do whatever it wants, and enjoys complete immunity from Serbian authorities. That was the only thing that Serbia did not accept. Everything else Serbia accepted as from the NATO ultimatum. So that was very similar. But to say that Russia, which didn't really do anything, they just began to mobilize, in support of Serbia because Serbia was really facing aggression. Because Austria-Hungary was determined to have this war. Everyone knew Austria-Hungary wanted this war against Serbia. And while it was assumed that Austria-Hungary would be able to defeat Serbia, as it turned out, Austria-Hungary fought so badly that they weren't able to defeat Serbia. But it was assumed Austria-Hungary would be able to defeat Serbia. But if Russia got into the war on behalf of Serbia, then Austria-Hungary would be defeated. That was Germany's problem, that somehow, well, okay, if we let Austria-Hungary and Serbia fight it out, then Austria-Hungary will win, Serbia will be defeated, and that's great. But if Russia gets in, then Austria-Hungary will be defeated, and then Germany's in a lot of trouble because Austria-Hungary was Germany's only ally in Europe. So that was the German Austria-Hungary thinking. But to say that Russia was somehow a trigger for World War One, that is such a ridiculous way of looking at it. Then there's something else that is objectionable in that sentence. He says that he was the way he presented. Moscow has offered unflinching support for Serbia during and after the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s. Well, that's that would be news to Serbs about this unflinching support. They didn't think they got any support from Moscow. Serbia was left to its own devices, and Serbia was attacked twice by NATO. 1995 and 1999 was bombed heavily twice by NATO, and Russia didn't do anything. Russia didn't lift a finger for Serbia. Russia had supported the UN Security Council resolutions that were very harshly condemnatory about Serbia. Very, very nasty UN Security Council resolutions accusing Serbia of being instigating the wars, making Serbia the bad guys, imposing sanctions against Serbia. Russia supported all of that. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which targeted the Serbs almost exclusively, was supported by Russia. The ICTY continued year in, year out, receiving money from the UN and enjoying the endorsement of the UN Security Council, including Russia. Even though they knew that it was demonizing the Serbs, even they knew that almost all of the defendants at the ICTY were Serbs, they were still being supported by Russia. So it's news to the Serbs that they were enjoying unflinching support of Moscow. And then it says most Serbian voters have a strong affinity for Russia. Tourist shops outside Belgrade's biggest tourist attraction sell mugs landed with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Whenever they talk about these great ties between Russia and Serbia, keep in mind the Tito years, relations were not good between the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, to say the least. And then during the interwar years, the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, had very poor relations. So most of the time, they didn't have particularly great relations. And as I say, during the 1990s, Russia really didn't do anything for the Serbs. But that's the crap that you get in so much of mainstream media. Anyway, I think it's time to take a look at our Gaggle Locals board. All the people who very generously contribute to the upkeep of the Gaggle, but above all, the upkeep of the dogs, who consider themselves the masters of the Gaggle, and who feel that they deserve a lot of rewards and generosity. So thank you, everybody who has contributed to the tip jar, and I'm thanking you on behalf of the dogs. I mean, I can't get anything out of them. They're always disgruntled. But I will thank you. So thank you, everybody who's done this. And so Danaki, always good to see you, Danaki. Always thank you for all of your contributions. to the Gaggle. You're always posting really interesting stuff. And so Tanaki says, Dear George, who will accept the next peace plan and who will reject it in this sinister Punch and Judy show? Also, do you reckon it will take Russia longer than 1,418 days of the Great Patriotic War to arrive at the gates of, not to take the Donbass fortresses, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, whatever? Well, I think that's an excellent question. It was very hard to see from Putin's comments today. I mean, he didn't really answer the questions that were about, well, what is he going to accept? Okay, that's fine. I mean, you don't want to show your hand before any meeting, but he says, okay, fine. If you don't give us what we want, if you don't meet our demands, we will just take, by force of arms, the territories presumably of the Donbass and presumably Kherson and Zaporozhye as well. So, hey, you want to negotiate, we'll negotiate. If you don't, you don't. We'll just continue with doing whatever we're doing. But as I was saying earlier, I think that's not a great position to be in. I'm not at all sure that Ukraine is on its last leg. I don't think Ukraine is on the brink of collapse. I think Ukraine can go on fighting for some time. Again, 2-3 years. I think that's quite feasible. Even going by the numbers that Putin said when he says something, oh, well, the casualties outnumber new recruits by 15,000 a month. Even let's say that's true. That doesn't mean that you can't keep the war going for quite a long time. And that's the NATO strategy. NATO knows that you cannot defeat Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. What Ukraine can do, and what Ukraine and NATO together can do, is inflict enormous losses on the Russians. And that's all that's their only strategy. So this could go on for some time. And then I brought up the issue of the Zaharova mentioned about the Filipinos. If NATO really embarks on this, and I don't see why they wouldn't, hey, let's start going around the world recruiting people to go and fight in Ukraine. If we have a manpower issue, then this is how we address the manpower issue. I mean, many parts of the world have surplus manpower. Africa is overpopulated. I mean, if we have on average 4, 5, 6, 7 children per woman, where in Europe it's about 1.4 children per woman, you got 4, 5, 6, 7. You've got a surplus population. There isn't enough in Africa to sustain a population like that. So you say, are there people ready to go fight in Ukraine for $5,000 a month? Now, I think there are. Remember, that's not such a huge sum of money. Let's say, each person, you pay him $60,000 a year. All right, so $60,000. That's so you got you can build up quite substantial armed forces at quite a limited cost. They've already thrown billions at Ukraine, so you can throw more billions at Ukraine by just recruiting people around the world. You can never just assume that people aren't going to do anything. People are just going to sit there and say, oh, well, we're losing more people than we're gaining. That's it. Let's call it a day. We've lost. That seems to be the way Mearsheimer and others are thinking of it. And you have to think, well, the West is quite ingenious. They can find ways of getting around it and to continue this war. I mean, they're determined to continue this war. If you're determined to do something, you will find a way to do it. And that's why I think that I think was significant that Zaharova said that, hey, they're recruiting people in the Philippines. Yeah, I'm sure they are, and I'm sure they're recruiting people in other parts of the world as well. I mean, they want to keep this war going, and I think they're going to find ways to do it. So, to answer your question, I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. I really don't. I think, and that's why ultimately, I think this war is a terrible, terrible thing. And if you can end it on terms that are just not too catastrophic, I'd say end it. I'm just not in the camp, the Xenon camp. Oh, let's just march on to victory. Oh, we're gonna, Russia, we're gonna go, let's go. Let's go win this. I think that's I think it's a foolish way to go. Anyway, thank you, Danaki. And then Stone River, really good to see you, Stone River. Thank you so much for your generosity. Stone River says, Happy Thanksgiving, George. Thank you. Same to you. A leg of lamb with roast potatoes and onions and veggies on the menu for the gaggle today, saving the turkey for Christmas. That's really sounds great. A leg of lamb, that always, it's lamb has now become quite expensive. But when I was growing up in the UK, lamb really wasn't that expensive. You could easily buy a joint of lamb for on the weekend without setting you back. But now lamb is almost like you can only afford it about once a year. Lamb is definitely really really tasty. And the way you've described it with roast potatoes and onions and veggies on the menu. Remember George Orwell in his essay on Dickens, which is really worth reading. It's a really entertaining essay, and he says about, well, Dickens was really very very good at describing food. When he described food, he really made you hungry. And I think he had that, what was the expression, something like what was roast mutton with baked potatoes under it. And the way he said it, with, I think it was the phrase, roast mutton with baked potatoes under it. And you had to make it was under it. And I've never exactly been sure what mutton is. I mean, I guess mutton is old lamb or whatever, but it was always, well, boy, that's the Sunday roast. You have a roast mutton. But the interesting thing again with Dickens, and this goes back to what I was saying, is that even relatively poor people would have a Sunday roast. I mean, even people like Pickwick, definitely poor people, they would still have a Sunday roast. It's like it's now Sunday roast is you're lucky to be able to afford that. Anyway, enjoy your leg of lamb with roast potatoes and onions and veggies. So thank you very much, Stone River. And then Vic Shakapopoulos, dear George, given that you're a member of a rather prominent Jewish communist family, maybe you could help me understand an interesting dynamic of the early after-war period of the Eastern Bloc. Why was there a series of internal coups, purges, and show trials in most of the Eastern European communist parties that were directed mostly at Jewish communists? Does it have anything to do with the fact that socialist countries were supportive of Israel at its inception, especially Czechoslovakia? That's a very interesting question. I mean, it's a very complicated issue. The Because well, let's say in the case of Hungary. Now, Hungary, almost all of the communists in Hungary were Jews. I mean, boom. I mean, it was, I don't know, 95%. I mean, I think it was Hungary was, I mean, the coincidence of Jews and communists was, they just overlapped. And so that Rákosi, Gerő, Reich, Munich. You go through the list of Farkas and Gabor Peter and the rest of them. All the key Hungarian communist leaders were Jews. So the fight that took place, let's say in Hungary, was really among the Jews. It wasn't Jews versus Gentiles. It was among the Jews. And what was kind of interesting, in particular in the Hungarian case, was who won out? It was Rákosi won out over Reich. Now Rákosi he spent many years in prison. He had taken part in the 1919 Soviet Republic and was only released in 1943. There was a very interesting, intriguing kind of exchange that took place between Horthy's Hungary and Stalin's Soviet Union. Stalin returned to Horthy's Hungary kind of the flags that were captured by the Russians in 1849, and they were kind of returned to Hungary. But in exchange, Horthy had to release the Hungarian communists who were imprisoned. So Rákosi went to Moscow in 1943. My father met him there. I mean, my father always told about how he was just a kid then, but he met Rákosi at the Moscow train station when he arrived, having been released from prison. But Reich stayed on in Hungary. So if there was the fight between the Muscovites and the indigenous communists, it was the Muscovites who won out. And so it was Reich who was the chief defendant in the show trials. And of course, he was shot. Now, the aspect of the Zionist thing is, of course, very, very interesting. And because the Soviet Union under Stalin had been very sympathetic to the Jewish cause. Stalin was not necessarily sympathetic toward the Jews, and particularly the high preponderance of Jews among the old Bolsheviks. Particularly Trotsky and Kamenev and Zinoviev. He really didn't like them very much, but nonetheless, he was sympathetic to Zionism, and was I think the Soviet Union was among the first to recognize the state of Israel. I think it came before the United States. Stalin then abruptly changed his position on Israel. So let's keep in mind. I mean, he already was a lot of mistrustful of the Jewish influence among the communists, particularly the Trotskyism, and so on. But when Golda Meir was the first ambassador of Israel in the Soviet Union. So that was around 1945, 40, yeah, I think it was 1945 when she arrived in Moscow. And she was greeted with great enthusiasm and great excitement by the Soviet Jews. This, I think, really infuriated Stalin. I mean, he thought, hey, we did all this for the Jews. We kind of liberated the death camps. We fought and crushed Nazism, while the likes of Golda Meir were living in Palestine, blowing up the British. And it was an abrupt turn against Israel. And so then the part of the struggle that took place within the East European communist world, in those immediately after the war, there was an attack on Trotskyism. but it was also an attack on Zionism. Again, both obviously associated with Jews, but but you know, you you could and absolutely would have to be a Jew who was both against Trotskyism and against Zionism, which was the case with Rákosi, and then in Czechoslovakia as well, when you had Klement Gottwald. So the kind of the fight between in Czechoslovakia between Gottwald and Slansky, which kind of recreated a little the fight between Rákosi and Roik. Gottwald won out. Slansky was put on trial, and Slansky was executed. But always the enemy was Trotskyism and Zionism. So it was initiated from Moscow. This mistrust, deep mistrust of Zionism. They saw Zionism as a threat to the Soviet Union through communism. Now, in retrospect, when you kind of look back on that time, Stalin was really quite perceptive, because he suddenly saw that communism, the ideology of communism, world communism, world communist revolution, was indeed threatened by two ideological currents, both of which are clearly associated with the Jews. Trotskyism, which became extremely important and extremely influential in the United States, gave rise to this kind of the extreme anti-communism, Cold Warism, neoconservatism. We still have it to this day. And of course, Zionism, this kind of global identification with this little state. Who'd have thunk back in 1945 that this little country should arouse so much adoration? But Stalin seemed to have seen that. He somehow saw the major threats facing the Soviet Union were Trotskyism and Zionism, and I think it's he almost like he intuitively sensed this, and that's why I think it played this role in the purges in Eastern Europe after the war. After particularly after so in 56, I mean, well, you go back a little bit in 53. So 53, Rákosi is still riding high in Hungary. Obviously an opponent of Trotskyism, obviously an opponent of Zionism. He had done everything Moscow had wanted: collectivized agriculture, crash industrialization, purged the Trotskyists and the Zionists. Shot Roik. But now Stalin was dead. His patron was dead, and who arrives in Hungary? Well, it was Beria and Mikoyan. And then they say, well, people, there's a rumor in Moscow that you, Comrade Rákosi, are the king of the Jews. So having done all that, he gets for all his trouble, he gets called the king of the Jews. Well, I think Rákosi, I think, saw the writing on the wall. But there was without question there was a strong anti-Semitic quality to the uprisings in Eastern Europe in that period, 53 to 56, simply because the communists were associated with the Jews. However much these were non-Zionist, anti-Zionist Jews, nonetheless they got hit with the with the anti-Semitic brush, and which is of course what happened to my great uncle. My great uncle was also very anti-Zionist. Didn't want any special treatment for the Jews, but nonetheless he got dubbed the Jew, a Jewish terrorist, and so when he was captured in 1919, he committed suicide, knowing that he would not just be executed. Of course, he would be executed, but he would be tortured before execution. So that was the level of the hatred for the Jews. And then after Rákosi in Hungary, we got Kádár, and he was a distinctly non-Jewish communist who were then in power in Hungary. Anyway, Vic goes on. What was the agenda behind these purges? What was the ideological conflict about? I think, as I say, I think it was more about. I mean, obviously, there was a power struggle that who was going to win out. But at this stage, what Stalin was very upset about was the influence of Trotskyism and Zionism. And in the trials, the show trials, Trotskyism and Zionism come up again and again and again. That was the enemy. And I think, as I say, I think Stalin realized that they would become a serious intellectual forces in the future, and they would indeed threaten the sort of the ideological hegemony of this the communist-led Soviet Union. That was of course the Stalin-Tito split, but that would be a reason for purge of nationalist communists. Like Gomulka himself in 1968 presided over the anti-Jewish purge in the Polish Workers' Party. I got interested in the topic after watching Costa Gavras' Confession, and I still can't understand what it was all about. Yeah, the Costa Gavras film is definitely, yeah, I mean, it touches on the subject, but it wasn't done in a very convincing way. Then there was the one that was that the Confession? Yeah, there. No, I guess the Confession. I thought was there another film? Yeah, I think that was the Confession. I think we screened it on the Gaggle. We had the Confession. Unfortunately, at the time, I hadn't really figured out how to provide subtitles, so it was all in French. We want to screen it again with subtitles. And so yeah, there was you're right about the anti-Jewish purge. But that of course was later on in 1968. I mean, there was obviously there was a lot of other resentment against the Jews. I mean, obviously the Jews who were associated with the communists were absolutely hated in the early 1950s. But also the Jews came back after the war, and well, what one would expect, Jews wanted their property back. Well, their property was now gone. I mean, there were people living in them, and they weren't really willing to give them up. And so the Jews encountered quite a lot of hostility because, their nice apartments, they wanted their nice apartment back, and no one's going to give it to them. So, but I think this was an ideological or power struggle as to who would be the most loyal to Moscow. Tito was a slightly different case because Tito, he started pursuing a foreign policy. I mean, none of these people were pursuing a foreign policy different from that of Stalin. Tito was kind of defying Stalin on foreign policy. Tito was getting involved in the war in Greece. Stalin had said, no, that was part of our deal with Churchill, which is we're going to leave Greece to the British and the Americans. And Tito said, well, I don't care about that. I'm still going to get involved in this civil war supporting the communists in Greece. And then Tito started thinking about incorporating Albania within Yugoslavia. You can't, his problem was that he was kind of he started pursuing a foreign policy independent of Stalin. That's a serious problem. So it was a little bit different from what was happening in Hungary in particular, but also in Poland and in Czechoslovakia. But in each of those cases, you had a similar kind of a struggle between individual leaders, and it was a question of who was going to win out. So you had Rákosi and Reich, or you had the Gottwald and Slansky, and and that went as with the struggle that took place in the Soviet Union in the 1920s and 30s. The power struggle went together with an ideological struggle, and then, of course, show trials. And so you had show trials, which they took over from the Soviet Union. But you're right. I think we should show. We should screen the confession again. I mean, I think with the subtitles. Robert says, interesting, although I would be tempted to get the turkey out of the way now and do the lamb at Christmas time, as it is, I get to avoid turkey entirely. Oh, yeah, we talked about the concept. Okay, so Stone River, okay, that's all. And then Cynthia, always good to see you, Cynthia. And Cynthia, so it says, Happy Turkey Day, George. Can you name some other globe-trotting turkeys that you can carve into for the purpose of making mincemeat out of them, or that you could chase all around until they fall into a collapsing spin? Um, no, I'm a very, very gentle person. No, not. Cynthia, I should also say, is our, as I always say, is our film scholar extraordinaire. With an encyclopedic knowledge of cinema, presents us every week with amazing, fascinating information about the films that we screen here. So I just name some films to choose, and then I say, okay, well, this one won the poll. Let's screen it. But Cynthia then tells us a great deal about these films, and so what's important about them, how to think of them, how to look at them, and so on. It's really, really, really interesting, everything that Cynthia does. And I should say that because in our last poll, the fakes, fraudsters, and con men was a very tight battle, but because the voting has continued, Orson Welles' F for Fake is now ahead in the polls. So I think we're going to run Orson Welles' F for Fake next Monday. I think it's a very good film. And it's also Orson Welles' last completed film. I mean, he died in 1985, so this was 1973. So it's an interesting film because he appears in it. It's sort of a documentary, sort of not a documentary about a documentary. Very interesting and playful film, well worth watching. I'm really looking forward to learning more about the film from Cynthia. So I think that's absolutely something to look forward to. So happy Thanksgiving, Cynthia. Thank you so much for everything you do and all this incredible and fascinating knowledge that you impart for us. So thank you so much. And then Robert says, doesn't thank you so much, Robert, for your generosity. Robert says, doesn't the EU's entire female lineup, Ursula, uh, Roberta Metsola, yeah, we don't talk about her that much, Kaya Kallas, Annalena Baerbock, Sanna Marin, the Finn chick, seem more like a produced 1960s girl group than capable leaders chosen for their deep political and historical acumen. Well, the last thing you could say that they have any deep political and historical acumen. I tend to think that these women really aren't very bright. And that's what makes them very pliable for the people who have real power. When you're sort of youngish, you've kind of failed in a lot of different things, as Ursula von der Leyen failed in one position after another. If you suddenly are thrust with holding big, important positions, you become very grateful to your patrons. You think, here I am, I'm not the brightest bulb, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and I've got this immensely important position. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen, she's the president of the EU. I mean, that's how she presents herself. She used to be kind of a protege of Angela Merkel. Look at where she is now. Where's Angela Merkel? She's gone, forgotten. And Ursula von der Leyen strides around. I'm the president of the EU. Again, not a very bright person. Obviously, she is going to be very, very compliant with the people who wield power. And so all of the women you list, they're all got into their positions. They were kind of young. All of them are quite photogenic, and they become very grateful to their patrons, and they're willing to do whatever they need to do. First of all, to hold on to their positions, but I think, well, also just out of gratitude for being promoted over, way, way, way over their true abilities. I mean, you look at Kaya Kallas. I mean, her ignorance of history is just staggering. Can you imagine anyone saying something so stupid as over the last 100 years, Russia has attacked more than 19 countries that have never attacked Russia? I mean, can you imagine saying anything is idiotic? And there she's the EU's foreign minister. And Annalena Baerbock, she goes from foreign minister. Oh, now she's the president of the UN General Assembly. She continues to get ridiculously over promoted. Well, how do you respond to that? Well, you respond by being, utterly compliant and complacent towards the people who wield power. As I say, all of them are photogenic, so that always gives the EU a nice, pleasant look to it. You say, oh, well, they all look very nice. So there's others there, the Swedish foreign minister, I forgot her name. They're all kind of much of a muchness. And they are the key figures in the EU. But that's a deliberate thing. That's a deliberate. How does someone like Sanna Marin get to be prime minister? I mean, just look at her. I mean, just listen to her when she speaks, and you think, well, how does she get to be prime minister? Huh? That's the way power is wielded. That is the EU of today, and it's quite a shrewd move. Look how advanced we are. We have all these women, they have all these in important positions. Yeah, they're in important positions, but they're utter imbeciles, and they do as they're told. That's all that's required of them. So anyway, thank you so much, Robert. Happy Thanksgiving. And then Marty, always very good to see you. Thank you for all of your hilarious pictures and all these hilarious memes you post. And then so thank you. Happy Thanksgiving as well. And then Cynthia says, EU top diplomat. That's the EU. She's the foreign minister. Says Russian military size should be capped. Yes, she said it should be capped. And Russia's military spending needs to be drastically reduced. They just cap it. Like Russia's been defeated. Russia's a defeated power, the vanquished power, and we're going to impose conditions on Russia. Russia should be capped, and Ukraine should have the biggest army in Europe. Yeah, that's exactly right. But since Ukraine is broke, yeah, it'll be Europe who'll pay for it. Yes. Demographics is also an issue. The war, can the Ukraine afford to have 800,000 people in the military, which will take away so many from any workforce? Ultimately, they want Russia to reduce its military to give the Ukraine a better chance to win the SMO 2.0. Only a Kaya Kallas would think this is a great idea. No, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly how she is planning it. So Russia will reduce its military, but Ukraine will go up to 800,000, maybe even more. In the meantime, the EU is going to, and NATO will, of course, go on pouring in arms and weapons and financial support for Ukraine. It's a long-term project in order to build up Ukraine to go on waging this war against Russia. Keep in mind, she really wants that war against Russia. She has said the goal should be to break up Russia. She said that. Russia should be broken up. Broken, I don't know how many different states that it should be broken up, but she has said that the goal is to break Russia up. So that's why she wants to train Ukraine for that. She doesn't care about Ukrainians, so that's why how many Ukrainians die, she couldn't care less. If they go ahead with this plan that I was thinking of, which is, hey, let's start importing people from all over the world, particularly Africans, she doesn't care. She doesn't care bringing in, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Africans to fight in Ukraine. She doesn't care. Her only objective is to inflict some kind of a humiliation, defeat on Russia. She's just a pathological Russia hater, as are these others, Sanna Marin and all the rest, for no particular reason, other than that's what she's been told to think. I mean, we talked about this before. Kaya Kallas lived a privileged life in the Soviet Union. She had a very, very nice life there. Her father was, the head of the central bank in Estonia. So they were really among the cream of the Soviet elite. And yet she pretends that she somehow suffered. And the money she's made, I mean, she's a wealthy woman. Her family has made money through doing business with Russia. All these years, she's been doing very good business with Russia. That's how she comes to be wealthy. And yet she pretends that somehow she has had to endure this great pain and hardship as a result of Russia. And that's what she thinks that's the way forward. And so she's, whatever, however many Ukrainians die, however many Africans get important to Ukraine, she doesn't care. The only thing that matters is to inflict a defeat on Russia. And even if it leads to the bankruptcy of Europe, doesn't matter, so long as we're inflicting a defeat on pain on Russia, breaking it up. And then Cynthia says, below is the link to the Euroactiv article, which I commented on above. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, well, it was in that I don't know whether you saw it. I played it in that clip, that news conference that she gave. That's a nice outfit that she's wearing there. I mean, she does have a nice clothes sense. That looks nice. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And Anne Marie, always very good to see you. I can't really say happy Thanksgiving, Anne Marie, because of course you're in Switzerland, and there's no Thanksgiving in Switzerland. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. Anne Marie, of course, is our kind of musical talent, our musical expert, kind of a musical scholar and a distinguished musical practitioner. She plays in just amazing orchestras, works with extraordinary conductors and composers, and has traveled around the world with great orchestras. And we're very, very fortunate to have her musical input here, so that we can always learn from her experience, from her knowledge of music. And, it's always such a great pleasure to have you here in our discussions. And above all, for all of your really fascinating contributions, when you provide us with really, really, really penetrating insights into the finer points of the playing of classical music, things that I would love to have that knowledge. I would love to have that ability. So it's always such A great pleasure to read Anne Marie's contributions to the Gaggle. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. Really, really appreciate it. So thank you. Anyway, my time is up, way up. Thank you, everybody who joined me. I was hoping to get to the issue of the which we didn't have time because as we started talking about Vucic, and I wanted to talk about the Sarajevo safari and this the story we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but we really didn't have time for that. But I don't think a story is going to disappear. It's obviously a crock, but it's a sinister crock. I mean, this Serbia is in the crosshairs. It always has been. Even in Trump's crosshairs, everybody's out to get Serbia, and suddenly the story coming out of nowhere after 30 years about the Sarajevo safari. I was hoping to get to it, there just wasn't time, but we'll talk about it. I hope next Tuesday. Anyway, thank you everybody who joined me. Thank you for all of your contributions. Thank you for putting something into the tip jar. I'm going to have to deal with the dogs tomorrow. Then they look and they say, hey, tip jar. What's so difficult about that? And so I'm doing my best here, but they don't care about that. But anyway, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to all of our American friends, and we're going to be back. We're going to do some more podcasts over the weekend, and then next Monday we'll do the joint live stream with Peter. And then on Tuesday, I'm doing the solo. I hope to see everybody then. Until then, happy Thanksgiving and enjoy the weekend. All the best. Bye-bye.